at Refuge Church. It's great to be with y'all. Again, we are in Genesis chapter 9 this week, so I'm going to pray and get us started. God, I thank you that time and time again we return to these stories and you have new goodness for us. I pray that that goodness would seep into our souls this morning or whatever time of day we might be at, that we might be able to be warmed by your presence, be warmed and illuminated by the truth of who you are, Lord, that we would see you more clearly moment by moment, day by day. I pray that my words might be helpful, true, a blessing and a service to your people, and that you would be with me as I teach. I pray all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, so here we are, book of Genesis, chapter 9. We're not going to read the whole thing this morning. Ding, ding, ding. We're going to read the scandalous portion for our next sermon. So here we go, just the first part of Genesis 9. God knelt to bless Noach and his sons, and said to them, "Bear fruit, become many, fill the earth. Because of all of you, trembling and brokenness shall be over every living thing of the earth, and over every flying one of the sky, and in all that glides over the ground, and in all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are given. Every gliding thing that lives shall be food for you, like the glistening green plants I gave to you, all things. But flesh in its soul, which is its blood, you shall not eat. Blood for your souls I will seek from the hand of every living being. I will seek out him, and from the hand of humanity, from the hand of man, his brother, I will seek out the soul of humanity. Whoever pours out the blood of humanity, in humanity his blood will pour out. For in the shadow of God was humanity made. You bear fruit, become many, swarm in the earth, and become many in it. God said to Noach and to his sons to say, here I am, raise my cut agreement with you, and your seed after you, and every living soul that is with you, and the flying ones, and the silent ones, and the living ones of the land, and with you all that left the box to the living ones of the land. I cause to be raised my cut agreement with you, and shall not cut off all flesh again from the waters of the flood, and there will not again be a flood to destroy the land. God said, this is the emblem of the cut agreement that I am giving between me and you all and all living souls that are with you to the eras of eternity. My bow I give in a cloud, and it will be an emblem of the cut agreement between me and the land. It will be when I gather clouds over the land, the bow will be seen in a cloud, and I will remember my cut agreement that is between you and all living souls and all flesh. There will be no more of the flood water that destroys all flesh. When the bow is in the cloud, I shall see her and remember the eternal cut agreement between God and between all living souls and in all flesh that is upon the land. God said to Noach, this is the emblem of the cut agreement that I am raising up between myself and all flesh that is upon the land. Okay, so that's a lot. A lot of it is really poetic. A lot of it is chiastic, meaning there's repeated elements for a reason. So if you're not familiar with this passage and it feels like you're going crazy because you just heard God say that, yep, that's true. He did just say that. But there's these repeated elements for a reason. And here in this first section, like we talked about last week with the raven and the dove, right? We talked about those birds. Here, God is sketching out his posture in the new creation. So we have this repetition from before, from the creation story, to humanity and to the animals, right? Bear fruit, become many, fill the earth. That's the same creation mandate that we got before the flood. But then he says, because of all of you, trembling and brokenness shall be over every living thing, and then lists all of the different types of animals. He says, into your hand they are given. Every gliding thing shall be food for you, like the glistening green plants I gave to you, all things. Okay, so I'm itching to dig into each of these different phrases because there's so much here, but that's not the scope that we have set for our sermons, and so we're going to look big picture here. So what stands out to me big picture from this paragraph is in this new creation setting where God is re-giving his mandate, re-giving our calling, our charge of what we're supposed to be doing in this world. He adds this new piece to it. He says, because of all of you, trembling and brokenness shall still be here in all of these different areas, right? And I think that this is super interesting and potentially helpful, because if I'm imagining new creation, everything's just like all sparkling and rosy and shiny, and glitter puffs are everywhere. Not really, but that's the idea, like kind of how we imagine after somebody just gets baptized. Ta-da! Like everything's wonderful. We sing praise music. We don't talk about the brokenness necessarily. But God, in his new creations, he never erases the brokenness that has happened. Right in Revelation 21, talking about the new earth, our ultimate destination, right? He says that all of our tears will be wiped away, as in he will be there to comfort us as a parent in the ways that we might not have been comforted by ourselves, our families, our communities, right? It's not that there will be no tears, but that those tears will be met with love. And so also we see that kind of tension in this new creation. And that's the whole point of resurrection, right? God could have, if he was interested in just static perfection, he could have just created us to be immortal, the end. That's his idea of what's good. But instead, we have Easter coming up around the corner, right? We have this draw in resurrection between life and then death and then life again. And for God, it seems in this theme that he weaves throughout his book, that is more beautiful, more redemptive, more glorious, more healing than just trying to be immortal and trying to have goodness without anything else all the time. So knowing that God recognizes and doesn't gloss over our brokenness, right? If we kind of imagine God to be like an ambient benevolent force, we can kind of fall into that. I feel like, there's God's space where everything is perfect and we're down here where it's real, right? And then some of us want to stay in the spot of where we are spiritually, emotionally, on our healing from church trauma or whatever is in our story. Some of us want to stay in that desert space. We want to stay in a space without community. We want to stay in a space where we're not pursuing relationship with alongside God, because we feel like if we say yes to God and to re-engaging in that journey, if we leave the desert and try to go into the promised land, we feel like it'll be nullifying everything that happened in Egypt. Like it'll be saying Egypt didn't happen. And it's really important to testify that what happened in Egypt did happen, right? And so instead of letting ourselves move forward in forgiveness, move forward in healing, and identifying with things other than our pain, we can end up trapped back here because we want to acknowledge, no, this did happen to me, right? This is a part of my story, and I don't want to leave it behind because it was important, because it was wrong, because it changed who I am. And in God's story, us moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean that he's going to nullify that. It doesn't mean that we never talk about it again, right? That's the whole point of Passover, of Pesach, which also is coming up. I have to think about when this video comes out, but that's the thing, right? Every year they're remembering, this is where I've been and this is where I am now, and I choose to identify with freedom rather than slavery. And so God never asks us to remove the story of what happened, right? He doesn't say don't cry in Revelation. He just says that he meets us in that place and helps to wipe our tears away. And so, because God isn't denying the brokenness that's in creation, because we can trust, as we're going to see in just a second, that God is intimately concerned with the justice, that helps us to open up our hands and say, you know what, like maybe if I came from this church that hurt me in these horrible, severe ways and nothing bad has happened to them, right? The pastor who said XYZ hasn't, had a tornado pop him out of his house and had the voice of God say, "You were wrong," right? Sometimes that's our idea of what justice could look like, right? And maybe you've never thought that. Who am I to say what your journey has been like? But we feel like we can't move on, because if we do, it's like saying that pastor, that figure, that authority, that lesson, that trauma never happened. But in the midst of our pain, God says, yes, I see it, and I'm going to do something. That's our next section. And still, I call you to go forward and to say, what is my calling? Which here is to, right, be a co-regent with God, fill the earth, and therefore I am safe to walk into the promised land. So that is our first invitation today, to take comfort that God sees us and sees the brokenness, and that we are therefore free to go forward without making it the crux of who we are. Okay. So why does all of that work? How can we trust God that he really is passionate enough about justice that we are able to loosen our grip on our story a little bit and identify with other parts of it? Well, there's this section that, like I said, is very poetic, and it's all about blood. So this might feel weird. It's not necessarily the nice theological language with an outline and bullet points that would speak really clearly and easily to us. But if we think about, again, in the big arc of this story, what was wrong? What was God mad at? He wasn't mad at our humanity like in the Epic of Gilgamesh. He was mad, and his patience had run out with our violence against one another and the earth and women. Those were the three categories of violence that had showed up. So here we see that mirrored. God doesn't say, you know what, it's actually fine. I just won't flood the earth again. I get that you guys are going to kill each other, and that's just how it is. It's chill, I guess. It's not my preference, but here we are. No, that's not God's character, right? That's not kind of like Romans says. Do you not know that the kindness of God is meant to lead us to repentance, right? It's not just like an ambient cheerfulness. God is still passionate about violence, just because he also promises that he won't destroy everyone again. That doesn't mean that he shrugs at our pain. And so we have this little passage which really nails that home, drives it home for us. He says that he will seek out the one who spills blood and will pursue his soul. So where blood is spilled, where abuse is perpetrated, God does not skim over. He does not turn a blind eye. He doesn't just say, redemption will happen, even though we do believe that God is a God of redemption. He still says that this is a marring of our very soul. So in Western philosophy, we think about like our brain, our head being everything that's important, right? And maybe the heart is like there in the background, but it's not really trustworthy. In the Hebrew thinking, your soul, which is different than a spirit is breath, but your soul, this passage says, and it's backed up in Leviticus, is in your blood, which is much more holistic, right? Because that means my whole body is sacred, not just my head, because your blood goes through and brings that oxygen that comes in through the spirit, and from your bones, which is connected to the word for strength. There's a whole thing here. I don't have time to unpack. But God says all of this is sacred. And what makes you human, what makes you worth pursuing, what makes you something that he will fight for, is the fact that you have blood. So there is blood flowing in your body. God will pursue right for you. He's a bloodhound of justice. So that trust is what enables us to let go, right? Because if God doesn't care about the wrong that was done to us, then we're left to be the sole witness, and we have to repeat the story over and over and over. But if we can trust that God is in his ways, which might look different than ours, right? Working out justice, working out redemption, then we can be free to move forward and mark what happened on a regular basis, like at Passover. Okay, he doesn't take what happened to us lightly. And the reason, along with the blood section, that he cites for this is he says that we were made in the shadow of God. So if we're just use our image and likeness translation that we might be used to, it can be easy to misread that as being like, you're a mini version of me, and I don't let anything bad happen to me, so I'm not going to let anything bad happen to mini me, which is like, okay. It's, a little bit more egoic of God in that reading, and maybe that bothers you, and maybe it doesn't. But that would be just saying, mini me is like me, and I don't let anything bad happen to me, so I don't let anything bad happen to a mini me, a little idol of me, right? But here it says shadow. So this isn't just that God has his vice regents on the earth, his co-regents, and he wants to protect them so that they can go out and do their calling, or he's upset that the honor of that vice regent has been broken. But rather, we are created in his shadow. So there's lots of cool things about shadows that we could go into about what it means to be made in the shadow of God, a more exact outline of God than just like a kind of lumpy idol. You can talk about a couple of different things, but in Tanakh, throughout the course of Tanakh, to be in the shadow of God is a symbol of protection. So like in the Psalms, we see lots of imagery about God being like another bird, and his people come under his wings, under his pinions and feathers to be safe. And in other places, often sometimes the same Psalms, it talks about God being like a mountain, right? Mount Zion, and his people dwell in his shadow, because in the side of the mountain where the rain falls, in the shadow is where flourishing can happen. It's where protection is, right? And so God says that he's going to be this bloodhound of justice, sniff out what was done against us, and set it right, and however God decides that should happen, or however he works out that healing, that restoration. That's because he has set himself in the decision that he wants to protect us. He made us in his shadow as part of his household, underneath his mountain, underneath his wings, the baby birds of God. And so that is why he seeks out justice on our behalf. That is why he takes seriously our blood being shed, whether that's literally or spiritually and emotionally, right? Because not all abuse leaves scars. And so that is the framework within we can trust the loving protection of God, which is great. That's good news, at least to me. And then in this last section that we're looking at, he says, my bow I give in the cloud as an emblem of this cut agreement. It will be when I gather clouds over the land, my bow will be seen in a cloud, and I will remember my cut agreement that is between you and all living souls and all flesh. So a lot of things here. All flesh, this is inclusive. God always loops in all of creation on his big covenants because he takes them seriously as participants in his world, even when we don't. But what is culturally true is an emblem of a cut agreement back then would more likely be a giant rock with a cool picture of the god on it. There would be like engravings of the battles that he triumphed in, and there'd be like I'm thinking of Egyptian stelas. There'd be the pharaoh looking super cool with a really big hat, and he would be like stepping on the neck of some god or some people, or with a huge crowd of servants and slaves behind him. And so again, culturally, what probably would have stood out to them is, oh, this emblem of this covenant that he's making isn't so egotistical, right? It's not about how powerful he is. It's kind of the opposite, right? Being in the way of Jesus, being a follower of God, means that the emblem of a cut agreement isn't, some guy like flexing while standing next to the deer that he killed. It's a shimmering, beautiful thing of light. in the sky that's intangible, right? You can't even grab hold of it. It's only there for a short moment. And so sometimes that's how our comfort with God is, right? We have these flashes, these moments where through the rain, the sun cuts through and lights up, and suddenly we have understanding. And it's not always there. And so we have to have a sanctified remembrance that those moments have happened when we don't feel them, and all we do feel is the rain. But it's not just that he doesn't pick a big lightning bolt or a powerful pharaoh to be his emblem. He picks a rainbow. A rainbow, of course, is a bow, if you think about pictures of bows, but it's pointed upward. The arrow would be up. And so God says with this cut agreement that he holds himself to remember, not them, right? It doesn't say that when you see the cloud, you'll remember what you're supposed to be doing. It's when I see the cloud, God's speaking, and my bow in it, I will remember this cut agreement that I am making. And so the symbolism in this cut agreement, which there's lots of historical, I don't know, good, pretty rocks we could dig through and sort out and pull out and enjoy. But again, big picture. I'm staying in big picture. The big picture is the bow is pointing up at God. So even when we fail, even when we do utilize violence in this new creation, even when we do forget to walk out our calling to be good vice regents on this planet and protecting creation and doing the things that he has asked us to do, even when we're not walking in that way, even then, it's God's job to remember his plan for us, not something that he holds against us. And indeed, that the sword of Damocles is held over God's head, not over ours anymore. And if that still makes you uncomfortable, well, that's great that God's being good now, but the flood still happened. How was it that he held us to account before, but now I'm supposed to be excited because he changed his mind about it? If that's where you're at this morning, there is room for you at the table, but also we might try to remember that this is still a cultural story that's being turned in these different ways to help illuminate the original recipients of the text, to say, oh, how is my God different than the gods that I'm familiar with? And so you have to take the base story and turn it to be different in order to be able to celebrate who God really is, right? And so hopefully that helps. So again, we have a short portion from the Epic of Gilgamesh. We've been walking through comparing the primary source with this story to see what stands out. And normally I read a longer passage, but in the Epic of Gilgamesh that we've been looking at, the main character, the protagonist, set up an altar just like Noach did, and said all the gods gathered over it like flies, and Ishtar showed up and was complaining, and there was some chaos between the gods, and we drew connections about God's sovereignty and the fact that he's not in combat with other forces of equal power, right? That he's trying to work out his will despite them. The world isn't that chaotic. So that's what happens right before this. But then it says, when Enlil, the god, had come, when he saw the boat, so how the protagonist survived in the ark, right? He was wroth, and he swelled with anger at the other gods, at the host of heaven. And he said, had one of these mortals escaped, not one was to have survived the destruction. That may have a little dialogue. And Little goes on to say, lay upon the sinner his sin, lay upon the transgressor his transgression, punish him but a little when he breaks loose. Do not drive him too hard, or he perishes. Would that a lion had ravaged mankind rather than the flood. Would that wolves had ravaged mankind rather than the flood. Would that famine had ravaged mankind rather than the flood. Would that a deadly plague had ravaged mankind rather than the flood. Okay, so really clear contrast, right? In our story, God isn't like, Noach, did you get away from me? Whoopsie daisy, I meant to kill everyone. That's not the posture that God has. And then in this story, that's conversation between the gods, ends with kind of saying that the sinner does need to be punished, right? The transgressor does need to have it laid upon him, that he has transgressed. And in our story, it's the opposite, right? I know that you'll mess up again. I am aware that you have an evil inclination, right? We talked about last week. And yet I choose to take that upon myself rather than putting it on you. And then in this passage, listing all the other ways that you could take out mankind, right? Well, maybe one won't have a flood again, but they'll use a big lion or wolves or famine or a deadly plague. And we don't have any of that in God's story. He doesn't list like, I'll never again send floodwaters upon the earth, but it might be something else. That's not the tone. That's not the character of God. And again, the original recipients being used to this story, that would stand out to them as our God is different. He doesn't have a quiver full of ways to torture us when we go astray. Rather, he is allying with us to sniff out violence when it happens so that it doesn't overwhelm the earth again. We are safe with him to say yes and to move into this new era of new creation. And that takes a lot of courage and tenacity and trust. And so I'm going to pray for all those things this morning. God, I thank you that this is your character, that you are not insecure, you are not egotistical, you do not set up giant monuments to yourself. You do not need to scrub away our stories and our pain and say, "Mom, that never happened," in order to make yourself feel more comfortable. You let that be part of our story, and you let us honor it and what has happened to us, but you also meet us in that place with love, and ask us if we are ready to walk across the Jordan into the promised land. And so I ask for that courage, for that bravery, for that trust, for that love for ourselves, and saying that my life is worth something and I don't have to just stay here in my camp in the desert saying what happened to me was wrong, because you hold that banner and you fight for us, and therefore we can let go and look toward our own flourishing and the calling and the things that you have given us to do. I thank you for that, and who you are, and I pray that something in us this morning would say yes. That resonates, that rings as true, and enable us to move forward with you. I ask all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. Okay. If you've never joined us before and you'd like to, you can find a form on our website, refugepullman.com. There's also a little button in the left corner that says give. We'd love if you were able to help us out with a one-time or recurring gift. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your week. Bye.